was the greatest. And I'm not just saying because he's my brother, he was the greatest.
The first time I ever seen big garlic king prawns in the shells was Laurie ordered it in the restaurant, and I thought, what's that? And he had these king prawns, and I remember saying to him, oh, that looks great, can I try one? And he peeled it.
When Laurie Cunningham died in a car crash in 1989 at just 33 years old, he left behind a legacy that divided football. Some called him a genius, a trailblazer who changed the game forever. But there were plenty of legends who absolutely hated him. From the moment he stepped onto a pitch, Cunningham had a way of making enemies out of the best defenders in the world. His style was different, almost arrogant to some, and that difference sparked conflicts that would define his entire career. Before we dive into the bitter rivalries that made his career so controversial, let's remember what made Cunningham special in the first place. He was 1/3 of the famous 3 degrees at West Bromwich Albion, playing alongside Cyril Regis and Brendan Batson. These 3 black players blazed a trail through English football at a time when racism was everywhere. They faced unimaginable abuse and hostility every single week, but Cunningham stood out even among these pioneers. He had something nobody else had, a background in ballet. Yes, you read that right. Before he became a football legend, he'd turned down an offer from the prestigious Ballet Rambert. That dancing background gave him a style on the pitch that defenders had never seen before. His movements were described as balletic grace, mixed with explosive speed. He could glide past players like he was performing on stage, not battling on a muddy pitch. His career started at Leyton Orient between 1974 and 1977, where fans were already talking about his spine-tingling speed and skill. But it was at West Brom where things really took off, and it's also where the hatred started to build. You see, Cunningham wasn't just good, he was the kind of player who made experienced professionals look absolutely foolish, and nobody forgets that kind of humiliation. One of his earliest victims was the entire Chelsea defence. Picture this: Cunningham picks up the ball near the halfway line on the left wing. Standing in front of him are 4 seasoned defenders: Kenny Swain at right back and 3 central defenders: David Hay, Steve Wicks and the notoriously hard Ron Harris. Harris was known as one of the toughest, most uncompromising players in English football, the kind of defender who'd leave his mark on you, literally. But Cunningham didn't care. Using his dancer's footwork, he accelerated and swayed past them one by one. Each of them challenged, and each of them failed. Harris, the hard man, couldn't lay a finger on him. It was the kind of goal that makes defenders question their entire career, and you can bet they didn't forget it. Now, before we get into the really bitter stuff, let's talk about you for a second. If you're enjoying this deep dive into football's most controversial moments, hit that subscribe button. And here's a question for you. Have you ever seen a player completely embarrass an entire defence like Cunningham did to Chelsea? Drop your favourite moment in the comments below. Let's see if anyone can top that. But the real hatred, the kind that burns deep, came later. By 1978, Cunningham was at the peak of his powers with West Brom. The team was leading the First Division and making waves in Europe with a 2-0 UEFA Cup victory against Valencia. Cunningham's performance against Valencia was so dazzling that it caught the attention of Real Madrid. But before he left for Spain, he had one more English defender to destroy. His name was Stuart Houston, and he played for Manchester United. On the 30th of December 1978, West Brom travelled to Old Trafford to face United. It was freezing cold with snow on the pitch. The 3 degrees, Cunningham, Regis and Batson, faced audible boos and racist abuse from the Manchester United fans. But Cunningham let his feet do the talking. What happened that day was jaw-dropping. He ran Stuart Houston ragged, absolutely ragged. On one particular play that led to a goal, Cunningham let the ball beat Houston before accelerating away again, showing off that perfect combination of pace, grace and control. Houston was desperate. He knew he couldn't keep up. As Cunningham moved down the inside right channel to score, Houston took a wild swipe at his ankles. He connected with nothing but fresh air. Over 45,000 people watched Houston fail completely. That moment, that humiliation in front of a massive Old Trafford crowd must have burned. West Brom won 5-3, and Cunningham's performance convinced Real Madrid that he was comparable to the best footballers in Europe. Houston's nightmare became Cunningham's ticket to Spain. In 1979, Real Madrid paid a club record $950,000 to bring Cunningham to the Bernabeu. He became the first English player to ever join the Spanish Giants. It should have been a dream move, the pinnacle of his career. Instead, it became the source of his deepest conflicts. The hatred he'd sparked in England was nothing compared to what was waiting for him in Madrid. His problems started immediately, on his very first training session. Cunningham did something that would haunt him for his entire time in Spain. He nutmegged Jose Antonio Camacho, a veteran defender and one of the most respected players at the club. For those who don't know, a nutmeg is when you play the ball between someone's legs. It's designed to make defenders look foolish, to embarrass them in front of everyone, and Cunningham did it to Camacho on day one. In training, to a club legend, the act was seen as brazen disrespect toward the established hierarchy. Camacho represented everything traditional about Spanish football, discipline, respect for veterans, and communal values. Cunningham's flashy move was a direct challenge to all of that. It immediately created antipathy in the dressing room. From that moment, Cunningham was marked as an outsider, an arrogant foreigner who didn't respect the club's culture. But the conflict didn't stop with Camacho. Another teammate, veteran player Gregorio Benito, saw an opportunity to take advantage of the isolated young Englishman. Benito sold Cunningham a mansion in the town of Las Matas for what Cunningham later described as a fortune. It was a rip-off, pure and simple. Cunningham later confessed to feeling cheated by his teammate. Think about that for a second. This wasn't an opponent trying to beat him on the pitch. This was someone in his own dressing room, someone who should have had his back, financially exploiting him because he knew Cunningham was alone and vulnerable. It showed just how deep the isolation went. His teammates didn't just dislike him, they were willing to betray his trust for money. The cultural clash went beyond football. Spain in 1979 was still recovering from the Franco dictatorship. National Catholic morality remained strong, and Spanish society was deeply conservative. Cunningham was the complete opposite. He was a trailblazing fashionista and free spirit, associated with the countercultural Movida Madrileña youth movement in Madrid. His personal life drew constant criticism. His relationship with his white partner, Nikki Brown, was interracial, and the fact that they weren't married was explicitly noted and judged by the wives of other Madrid players. In post-Franco Spain, Cunningham's lifestyle was seen as provocative, even offensive. He was young, black, expensive, and refused to conform. That made him a target. On the pitch, things weren't much better. Spanish defenders targeted him with crunching tackles. A player named Bizcocho from Real Betis delivered a tackle so brutal it nearly ended Cunningham's career. His unique style, that balletic grace that made him so hard to tackle cleanly, seemed to frustrate defenders to the point where they'd rather injure him than let him past. His outsider status gave them extra motivation to be aggressive. After all, who would defend the arrogant Englishman who disrespected Camacho and flaunted his lifestyle? Cunningham's manager, George Petchy, back at Leyton Orient, had fined him multiple times for being late to training sessions, but instead of falling in line, Cunningham entered dance competitions to win the money needed to pay those fines. It was classic Cunningham, prioritising his personal artistic identity over what the institution demanded. That pattern followed him to Madrid, where his refusal to conform made him even more isolated. Despite all the hatred, all the isolation, and all the conflicts, Cunningham still managed to win a league and cup double in his first season at Real Madrid. He proved his quality on the biggest stage in European football, but the cost was enormous. He was exploited, isolated, and targeted both on and off the pitch. His pioneering status as the first Englishman at Real Madrid, combined with being a black player in a conservative society, meant every action was judged harshly. The playful nutmeg, the late arrivals, the unconventional relationship, all of it was used against him. He needed strong support from the club, but instead he found himself alone, surrounded by teammates who resented him and opponents who wanted to hurt him. Looking back, it's clear that Cunningham's career was defined by conflict. From the Chelsea defenders he humiliated at Leyton Orient to Stuart Houston's nightmare at Old Trafford. From Camacho's wounded pride to Benito's betrayal, Cunningham generated intense reactions wherever he went. Some of it was professional, defenders hating him because he made them look incompetent. Some of it was cultural, people who couldn't accept his style, his lifestyle, or his refusal to conform. But all of it came from the same source. Cunningham was different. He brought ballet to football. He brought style to a game that valued toughness. He brought individuality to environments that demanded demanded conformity. The legends who hated Laurie Cunningham weren't bad people. They were products of their time, shaped by traditions and expectations that Cunningham challenged simply by being himself. But here's the thing, while they were busy resenting him, hating him, and trying to stop him, Cunningham was busy changing football forever. He showed that skill could beat strength, that grace could defeat aggression, and that being different wasn't a weakness, it was a superpower. His tragic death in 1989 cut short a career that was already legendary, but the legacy he left behind, the trail he blazed for black players, the barrier he broke at Real Madrid, and the defenders he left grasping at air, that legacy lives on. The legends may have hated him, but they could never stop him. And that's what makes Laurie Cunningham unforgettable.
Do you have any idols?
Oh, you know, Kenny Dalglish.
When I joined Liverpool, I was just terrified.
Do you think you're worth all that money?
I never paid it, I don't know.
We soon came to realise that this was a new era.
And he's curled it in!
And Dalglish was integral to that.
So Kenny Dalglish occupies a hallowed space in Liverpool's history. He's a king to the fans, a manager who delivered 3 league titles and 2 FA Cups in his first spell. His leadership transcended football, especially after Hillsborough, where he was colossal and heroic, universally lauded as a beacon for the club and the city. But despite this heroic image, his managerial style was also defined by stark contradictions. He was a ruthless moderniser who had fiery run-ins with players, and his methods created bitter conflicts. So how could this beloved icon be the same man a club captain felt was nuts? Why do at least 4 legends seem to hate Kenny Dalglish? When Dalglish was appointed player manager in 1985, it created immediate friction with club captain Phil Neal. Neal was one of Liverpool's most decorated players, but he was bitterly disappointed because he felt he had been practically promised the manager's job. This was a direct challenge to Dalglish's new authority. Instead of winning Neal over, Dalglish acted swiftly. One of his first moves was to phase Neal out. After starting the first 8 league games, Neal was dropped for Steve Nicol and, by December, was transferred to Bolton. This wasn't just dropping a player. It was a deliberate and rapid consolidation of power. Dalglish inherited a team of champions who were his friends and teammates, meaning conventional managerial authority could not be assumed but had to be forged. Neal, as club captain and a perceived rival for the job, represented the old leadership structure. By swiftly marginalising him, Dalglish sent an unequivocal message to the dressing room. The old hierarchy was obsolete, sentimentality would not guarantee a place, and his authority as player-manager was absolute. This necessary, albeit ruthless strategy established a new power dynamic, enabling him to build his team rather than simply managing the remnants of past eras. The relationship completely broke down. When Neal later published ill-advised comments in his autobiography, Dalglish served him with a High Court writ. His actions showed an unsentimental streak, proving he was willing to discard a club legend to assert his absolute control. This was the first sign that beneath the heroic public image lay a manager who would do whatever it took to maintain his vision, regardless of personal relationships or club sentiment. The legal action against Neal was particularly telling. It wasn't enough to simply move him on. Dalglish needed to ensure that his authority would not be questioned even after a player had left the club. Dalglish securing his power by pushing out a club captain is a shocking move, but was it a necessary evil to build his own team, or was it a sign of a ruthless streak? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this look into the side of King Kenny you've never seen, be sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Striker Paul Walsh was signed by the previous manager and was widely seen as the long-term successor to Dalglish the player. When Dalglish became player manager, Walsh's world was turned upside down. As Walsh said, "It changed my destiny." His intended mentor was now his direct rival for a place in the team and his boss. The relationship was filled with fiery run-ins. Walsh describes a huge argument where Dalglish accused him of not trying. Walsh's angry response got him immediately placed on the transfer list. This highlights Dalglish's confrontational style and his non-negotiable demand for maximum effort. But it gets worse. Walsh harboured suspicions that Dalglish was cynically manipulating his players playing time to negatively affect his performance bonuses. Whether true or not, the perception reveals the psychological warfare at play. Walsh felt trapped in an impossible situation. He was trying to prove himself to a manager who was also competing against him for the same position on the pitch. Every time Dalglish selected himself to play, it wasn't just a tactical decision, it was a direct rejection of Walsh's ability and worth. The psychological pressure on Walsh was immense. He later admitted that his discipline faltered and that he was a drunk in my last Liverpool season, developing bad habits to console myself as his career at the club fizzled out under Dalglish. Dalglish's management style didn't just end Walsh's Liverpool career, it sent him into a spiral. What makes this case particularly tragic is that Walsh wasn't a troublemaker or a poor player. He was a talented striker whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. His destiny was indeed changed, but not in the way anyone had hoped when he signed for Liverpool. The Walsh case reveals something darker about Dalglish's methods. It suggests that his loyalty to players only extended to those who posed no threat to his own position or authority. These episodes with Neil and Walsh established a pattern. Dalglish was building something extraordinary in his first spell, but the human cost was real. Players who challenged him, intentionally or not, found themselves on the outside looking in. Yet, this ruthlessness also brought results. After a trophyless season in 1986 and 1987, Dalglish demonstrated his capacity for rebuilding. He sanctioned the sale of star striker Ian Rush to Juventus and masterminded the construction of a new, breathtaking attacking force, signing John Aldridge, Peter Beardsley and John Barnes. The team that emerged in 1987 and 1988 is widely regarded as playing some of the most aesthetically pleasing and dominant football in the club's history. They embarked on a 37-match unbeaten run in all competitions from the start of the season, including 29 in the league, and secured the title with 4 games to spare. Statistically, his first spell was a period of almost unbroken supremacy. His overall win percentage of 60.91% remains one of the highest in the club's history, a testament to his ability to maintain and evolve the winning machine he inherited. The success vindicated his harsh treatment of Neil and Walsh. In football, winning excuses almost everything, and Dalglish was winning consistently. But then came Hillsborough. On April 15, 1989, a crush at an FA Cup semi-final led to the deaths of 97 Liverpool supporters. His conduct during this period was universally lauded. He became a beacon for the club and the city, demonstrating immense compassion and strength. He ensured the club was represented at every funeral, personally attended many, organised visits to the injured, and spent countless hours with bereaved families. His presence was described as colossal and heroic. This was the third stadium tragedy Dalglish had personally experienced, following the Ibrox disaster in 1971 and Heysel in 1985. A cumulative burden of unimaginable weight. Unbearable. Dalglish later admitted that Hillsborough was the most important factor in his decision to leave, and that he had wanted to resign a year earlier, after winning the league in 1990. The breaking point came on February 22, 1991, 2 days after a draining 4-all FA Cup replay against Everton. Dalglish resigned, a decision that shocked the football world. At the time of his departure, Liverpool were 3 points clear at the top of the league and still in the FA Cup. In his press conference, he cited the cumulative pressure of 20 years in the front line, stating he felt as if his head is exploding. In a poignant admission, he said it was the first time he had ever put the interests of Kenny Dalglish over Liverpool Football Club. The act revealed a man who had so completely subsumed his own well-being for the club that his only remaining option was to walk away. Jump forward to Dalglish's second spell, which began in 2011. Nearly 2 decades had passed, and the football world had changed dramatically. On January 8, 2011, Dalglish was appointed caretaker manager, answering an SOS from the club's new owners, Fenway Sports Group. He replaced Roy Hodgson, whose disastrous 6-month tenure had left the team in turmoil, languishing in 12th place and just 4 points above the relegation zone. The appointment was a masterstroke in uniting a fractured and disillusioned fan base, with Dalglish's legendary status serving as a stabilising force. The impact was instantaneous, and he was given a permanent 3-year contract in May 2011. On deadline day, Dalglish sold Fernando Torres for $50 million and brought in Andy Carroll for a club record $35 million. The signing was a key part of Dalglish's downfall. The team's league performance was abysmal, finishing 8th, the club's worst since 1994. Dalglish publicly defended Carroll, dismissing the media's paranoia and obsession with his form and insisting the price tag was irrelevant. This public defence was a classic Dalglish circle the wagons tactic, but it was contradicted by visible on-field tensions. The relationship was clearly broken. The breaking point came in a defeat to Newcastle. Carroll, frustrated, was substituted. He stormed past Dalglish, ignored him, swore to himself, and went straight down the tunnel. Dalglish's mild public response, saying we need to channel it better, showed how his old-school methods were failing. This controlled public response stood in stark contrast to the private fury and immediate transfer listing that met Paul Walsh's defiance decades earlier. It suggested either a mellowing of his approach or a pragmatic recognition that a club record signing could not be handled with the same overt disciplinary force. Either way, he couldn't control his record signing, and his public denial just made the $35 million failure look even worse. The single defining controversy of Dalglish's return was his handling of the Luis Suarez racism incident. Suarez was found guilty by an FA commission of racially abusing Patrice Evra and was banned for 8 matches. Dalglish and the club adopted a hugely defensive stance. He treated the racism charge as an external attack on his player and club. His response was a public relations disaster. His media appearances became belligerent and combative. Most infamously, he had his players wear T-shirts supporting Suarez during a warm-up. The football world was appalled. Prominent anti-racism organisations accused the club of critically undermining their efforts. A YouGov poll found 38% of British fans thought Dalglish handled it badly. Sir Alex Ferguson even said he wasn't surprised Dalglish was sacked, citing the Suarez affair as a major reason. Years later, Dalglish himself admitted he would handle the situation completely differently if it were to happen again, and conceded that the T-shirt protest might have been misguided. He also sought to deflect sole responsibility, stating there are other people with greater intelligence than me and greater responsibilities than me when it comes to something like this. This showed Dalglish's 1980s siege mentality was a catastrophic failure in the modern 24-hour media world. In the 1980s, a manager's primary audience was his dressing room and local supporters. By 2011, a manager at a club like Liverpool is a global ambassador for a multi-million-pound brand. Dalglish applied an 80s solution to a 21st century problem. What he saw as loyalty, the global audience saw as a tone-deaf and morally questionable defence of racism. It was a failure of moral leadership that badly damaged his and the club's reputation. This failure to evolve his methods made him incompatible with the vision of a modern, data-driven and brand-conscious ownership group. Dalglish's managerial profile is one of absolutes. He demanded 100% commitment and showed fierce, almost paternal loyalty to those players. This loyalty, however, was conditional. It was extended only to players he believed were 100% committed to the cause. As John Aldridge, player from his first spell, noted, Dalglish was amazing because he could be both a mate and being your boss. But there was a clear line that could not be crossed. When that line was crossed, or when his authority was challenged, he proved to be confrontational and unsentimental. The swift dismissals of club legends like Phil Neal and his power struggles with Paul Walsh demonstrated a ruthless streak necessary to assert control. But, as Neal and Walsh discovered, he was also confrontational and unsentimental if his authority was challenged. His greatest strength, that us against the world defiance, became his biggest failure in the Suarez crisis. Yet, despite these controversies, his legacy at Anfield is secure. He delivered the club's first ever double and built one of the most exciting attacking teams in history. He remains the king to Liverpool fans, not just for the trophies, but because he was the man who stood as a pillar of strength for a community in its darkest hour after Hillsborough. His achievements in his first spell rightly place him in the club's managerial pantheon alongside Bill Shankly and Bob Paisley. His greatness and his flaws are inextricably linked, making him one of the most complex and significant figures in football history.
So to go in the respect of scout is hard because they know a fraud when they see one. God, we've had a few frauds, in all fairness. So yeah, so for me it wasn't about, it's about winning personally for stuff, but in the main, if you can get the respect of the fans. And
when Piers Morgan called Neville Southall nuts, the TV host might have been onto something. Here was a goalkeeper celebrated worldwide, a working-class hero who went from collecting bins to becoming the best in the world. But behind the legend, there was a man who sparked conflict everywhere he went. How does someone so loved become so controversial? Let's find out. Neville Southall arrived at Everton in 1981 for just £150,000. Before that, he worked as a bin man, a waiter, and carried bricks on building sites. He climbed through the lower leagues, playing for tiny clubs most people never heard of. When he finally reached the top, he became unstoppable. He made 750 appearances for Everton, won 2 league titles, 2 FA Cups, and the European Cup Winners' Cup. In 1985, he was named Footballer of the Year. For a goalkeeper, that's nearly impossible. His rise was the stuff of dreams. But beneath this success, cracks started to appear. Southall didn't play by the rules everyone else followed. He was stubborn, difficult, and always seemed angry about something. His greatest strength on the pitch became his biggest weakness off it. The same fire that made him brilliant also made him a problem. The first major explosion came on 25 August 1990 during Everton's season opener against Leeds United at Goodison Park. After a terrible first half, Southall walked out of the dressing room early and sat down by his goalpost, leaning against it in full view of the entire stadium. This wasn't just odd behaviour, this was a public act of defiance. It came just 11 days after Southall had handed in yet another transfer request. The timing made it look calculated and selfish. Tommy Smith, the hard-nosed former Liverpool captain known as the Anfield Iron, was watching from the stands. He was furious. In his column for the Liverpool Echo, Smith tore into Southall. He said Southall was completely out of order and had gone way over the top. Smith argued that Southall was pushing Everton into a corner by constantly asking for a move. He insisted the club needed to deal with him harshly for this disgraceful display. Smith represented the old school of football where the team came first and individual protests were unthinkable. To him, Southall's sit-down was a betrayal of everything professional football stood for. Southall tried to defend himself. He told the Echo that his protest had nothing to do with his transfer request. He claimed he just needed to clear his head after the team played poorly and after fans had abused him during pre-season games. But his explanation sounded weak. The protest looked like a stunt designed to embarrass his own club and force their hand. It didn't matter what Southall said afterwards. The damage was done. He looked unprofessional, disloyal, and impossible to manage. Tommy Smith was right to condemn him. This public show of dissent was just the beginning. Do you think Southall's protest was justified, or was Tommy Smith right to slam him for it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss who he clashed with next. What made things worse was that Southall wasn't acting alone. He had already submitted 3 separate transfer requests that year. 3. He was clearly unhappy and wanted out, but instead of handling it privately, he made it everyone's problem. And then he dragged teammate Kevin Sheedy into it. Together, they handed in a double transfer request just before the season started. It was a coordinated attack on the club, a 2-man strike designed to hold Everton hostage. Sheedy had his own reasons for wanting to leave. He'd just played brilliantly for Ireland at the 1990 World Cup and wanted to play European football, which Everton couldn't offer because of the ban on English clubs after the Heysel disaster. That made sense, but Southall's reasons were vague. He was just disillusioned, frustrated, restless. It looked like he convinced Sheedy to join his campaign, using his teammate as leverage to get what he wanted. Instead of being allies, it seemed like Southall turned their friendship into a weapon against the club. It was selfish and manipulative. The double transfer request created chaos. 2 of Everton's biggest stars were trying to force their way out right before the season. It damaged the club's reputation and put enormous pressure on the manager. Southall wasn't just unhappy, he was actively making things worse for everyone around him. This wasn't the behaviour of a professional. This was the behaviour of someone who thought he was bigger than the team. But Southall's controversies didn't stop when his playing days ended. If anything, they got worse. He he became an outspoken activist on social media, championing causes like LGBT rights, mental health, and support for sex workers. On the surface, this seemed admirable, but when he talked about former teammates who took the traditional route into TV punditry, his tone turned bitter. Gary Lineker was one of those teammates. Lineker had been a top-class goal scorer at Everton, and Southall even called him a nice fellow. But later, Southall started criticising what he called the media gravy train of ex-players. Lineker is the king of that world, hosting Match of the Day and earning millions for talking about football. Southall never attacked Lineker directly with the same venom he used on others, but his words made it clear what he thought. He saw Lineker as someone who'd sold out, who'd chosen comfort and money over making a real difference. The contrast between their post-playing careers is obvious. Lineker stayed in the spotlight, became a household name, and built a media empire. Southall went to work in a special needs school and used Twitter to shout about politics. He chose to be an outsider, to reject the establishment. But was that choice made out of principle or out of jealousy? Lineker succeeded in a world Southall never entered. Southall's activism might just be his way of coping with the fact that he couldn't achieve the same mainstream success. His criticism of the media gravy train sounded less like a moral stance and more like sour grapes from someone who felt left behind. This hypocrisy became even clearer when Southall launched into Piers Morgan. In 2018, Morgan criticised footballer Raheem Sterling for getting a tattoo of a gun on his leg. Morgan said it glorified violence. Sterling later explained the tattoo was deeply personal, a tribute to his father, who was shot and killed when Sterling was a child. Southall jumped to Sterling's defence, but not in a calm or measured way. He called Morgan a prick. Then he said if Sterling had tattooed a massive cock on his leg, it would remind him of Piers Morgan. It was crude, vulgar, and completely unprofessional. Southall defenders tried to frame this as him standing up for a young black footballer who was being unfairly attacked by the media, but that's too generous. This wasn't a principled defence. This was a personal insult designed to grab headlines. Southall could have defended Sterling without resorting to crude jokes and name-calling. Instead, he chose the lowest path possible. He wanted attention, and he wanted to pick a fight with someone famous. It worked. The quote went viral. People laughed. But what did it actually achieve? Nothing. It just made Southall look unhinged and desperate. This is the pattern with Southall. He claims to be fighting for the vulnerable and speaking truth to power, but his methods are reckless and self-serving. He attacks people publicly, uses offensive language, and wraps it all up as activism. The Piers Morgan incident wasn't about defending Sterling. It was about Southall making himself the story. He positioned himself as the working-class hero taking on the media elite. But really, he was just lashing out because he enjoys the conflict. Looking at all these incidents together, a clear picture emerges. Southall staged a sit-down protest that embarrassed his club. He handed in 3 transfer requests in 1 year and convinced a teammate to join his revolt. He took subtle shots at a successful former teammate who built a respected media career, and he launched a vulgar personal attack on a TV personality to score cheap points. This is not the record of a principled man. This is the record of someone who is difficult, disruptive, and impossible to work with. It's easy to see why so many people found him frustrating, but here's the twist. That same difficult, uncompromising nature made him great. On the pitch, his refusal to accept second best, his relentless standards, his absolute determination made him one of the finest goalkeepers the world has ever seen. You don't become Footballer of the Year as a keeper by being easygoing. You do it by being obsessive, demanding, and a bit mad. His individualism, his willingness to stand alone, his refusal to follow the crowd, all the things that made him controversial also made him brilliant. And after football, that same energy fueled his activism. He didn't coast into a comfortable TV job because he wanted to do something harder, something real. His work for LGBT rights, mental health charities, and marginalised communities comes from the same place as his sit-down protest. He refuses to conform. He refuses to stay quiet. He refuses to play it safe. The man who sat by the goalpost in 1990 is the same man campaigning on Twitter today. today. His flaws and his strengths are two sides of the same coin. So yes, while hatred is a strong word, it's clear Neville Southall created friction wherever he went. But maybe that friction was inevitable for someone who simply refused to fit in. He was challenging, controversial, and often wrong in how he handled things, but he was also great. And perhaps, in the end, you can't have one without the other. Ian Rush, Liverpool's all-time greatest goalscorer, a legend whose name is written into the very fabric of Anfield. But behind the 346 goals and the glittering trophies lies something darker. Because Rush himself admitted that he absolutely hated some of the men he played alongside, this isn't the celebration you might expect. In 2024, at the age of 63, Rush released something truly bizarre, a 90-minute AI-generated musical that was supposed to tell the story of a legal battle. But what it really became was something far stranger, a surreal, score-settling production that revealed more about Rush's character than he probably intended. The AI voice mispronounced his own name as Ian Rush. American accents clashed jarringly with this quintessentially British tale, and the lyrics descended into what critics called a rant, a laundry list of personal grudges wrapped in a self-praising tone. It wasn't art, it was revenge set to music. The production was styled after Hamilton, the Broadway hit, but where that musical told a story of nation-building and ambition, this told a story of petty resentments, to control his narrative in a media landscape that had moved on without him, but instead of reclaiming his story. And it begs the question, what drives a celebrated hero to air his dirty laundry in such a strange, public? The answer lies in a career defined not just by goals, but by bitter, simmering conflicts. The musical was tied to Irama, a Singapore-based firm with a dark reputation. After Irama bought their grounds, non-league clubs like Whiteleaf and Abingdon Town were forced to withdraw from their leagues, sparking outrage across grassroots football. Rush's role in this mess was murky. The company called him a real estate investor and partner, then simultaneously issued disclaimers claiming he played no part in the business and shouldn't be held responsible. Rush himself tweeted cryptically about having nothing to do with the dealings, then mentioned a police investigation and people facing consequences, clear as mud. The legal battle at the heart of the musical was a 4-year dispute between Rush, Irama, and former owners of Whiteleaf, and the musical's lyrics took the extraordinary step of naming senior lawyers and judges directly, what appeared to be a high-risk and unconventional legal strategy. It was a public attack on the UK legal system itself, accusing them of obstructing justice and denying Rush his day in court. But the heart of the musical, the real emotional wound, was aimed squarely at two Liverpool legends, Robbie Fowler and Jamie Carragher. According to the AI-voiced Rush, they were asked to provide video clips for an Irama-related cause, something to do with charity. With the kids, no scandal. But as the media turned on Irama over the non-league club controversies, Fowler and Carragher apparently vanished. No explanation, no conversation, and this is where Rush's bitterness truly poured out. The lyric that captured it all, the line that was mocked and quoted everywhere, went like this: "But they never called old Rushy back. No mate-to-mate hello, just vanished from the WhatsApp thread, like Gerrard missed a throw." It's petty, it's thin-skinned, and it transforms what should have been a business controversy into a story of personal betrayal. The lack of a simple phone call became, in Rush's eyes, a profound breach of loyalty. What makes this particularly baffling is Rush's otherwise positive relationship with Fowler. He'd appeared as a guest on the Robbie Fowler podcast, where he was spoken of as a mentor to the younger striker. They'd shared stories, laughed about the old days, and yet now, in this musical, Rush was publicly attacking him. But here's the thing, were Fowler and Carragher just making a smart business decision? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you enjoy uncovering the stories behind the legends, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Rush seemed stuck in a different era, the 1980s dressing room, where you backed your mates no matter what. He couldn't grasp that Fowler and Carragher weren't attacking him personally. They were media figures now, with brands to protect. Association with Irama, with clubs folding and fans furious, would have been reputationally toxic. Their silence wasn't betrayal, it was professional risk management. But Rush, still operating by the old code, took it as a slap in in the face, and then came the catastrophic PR fallout. The musical was premiered, not at the Cannes Film Festival as initially suggested, but at a rental property nearby. A comparison to the Four Seasons Total Landscaping press conference was immediate and brutal. On Reddit, the reaction was savage. Users called it hilarious, desperate stuff, and so fucking bad. But the most disastrous decision of all was uploading the entire 90-minute musical to Vimeo under a Creative Commons public domain license. Whether intentional or not, Rush effectively surrendered all copyright. This mind-boggling scheme can now be endlessly copied, remixed, and shared, immortalizing his misjudgment forever. This wasn't Rush's only meltdown. Rewind to November 1996. Elland Road. Rush was back, facing Liverpool for the first time since leaving. After 16 legendary years and 346 goals, he'd joined Leeds at the end of the previous season. The match was billed as an unhappy reunion, desperate to score against the club he'd defined. Just before the hour mark, it all boiled over. Rush passionately appealed for a penalty, but this wasn't just a tactical protest. It was the spark that ignited an ugly skirmish, a heated scuffle involving players from both teams. Rush and Wright were both shown yellow cards. After the match, which Liverpool won 2-0, Leeds manager George Graham backed his striker, insisting a penalty should have been given. But look deeper. This was Rush buckling under the psychological weight of facing his own legacy. He'd just left the club where he was worshipped, and now he was the enemy, tasked with conquering the very institution he'd helped build. Mark Wright, wearing that famous red shirt, became a symbol of the past Rush was trying to defeat. The outburst was aimed as much at his own history as it was at the referee. A former teammate had become a proxy for everything Rush was fighting against. And yet, before any of these public feuds, before the musical and the meltdown at Elland Road, there was Kenny Dalglish, the man who would become Rush's greatest strike partner, and the man Rush openly admitted he almost hated. In his early days at Liverpool, Rush received an incessant stream of abuse from senior players, and Dalglish led the charge. The hazing was relentless. They mocked everything: his car, his clothes, his hair. It was a brutal sink-or-swim environment, and Rush nearly drowned. By his own account, he almost sank under the pressure. But this wasn't personal hatred. It was Liverpool's boot room culture, a deliberate trial by fire designed to test the character of new arrivals. The abuse wasn't a flaw in the system. It was a feature. If you could survive the hazing, you proved you had the mental toughness to thrive at Anfield. The culture, established by Bill Shankly, prioritised mental toughness and collective identity above all else. Despite the friction off the pitch, Rush and Dalglish barely spoke socially. Yet on the field, their partnership worked straight away. It was telepathic. Rush had the pace. Dalglish had the football brain. Dalglish's vision was so extraordinary that he often didn't need to look up. He knew where Rush would be, playing passes into space with absolute certainty. The numbers tell the story. In 241 games together, they were involved in 49 joint goal participations. Between 1981, Dalglish provided the assist for at least 39 of Rush's goals. During the historic 1983-84 treble-winning season, Rush scored an astonishing 47 goals in all competitions, largely thanks to Dalglish's creative genius. Together, they won 5 league titles, 1 European Cup, 1 FA Cup, and 3 League Cups. And the evolution of their relationship is telling. The initial hatred, though personally difficult for Rush, ultimately forged a deep professional respect that blossomed into one of football's most devastating partnerships. In time, Rush became a senior player himself, perpetuating the culture that had shaped him, and in their post-playing careers, the dynamic transformed completely. Rush now says they're closer than ever, that they get along brilliantly now, much better than when they were playing together. The early friction wasn't genuine personal dislike. It was a product of a demanding professional environment. So what connects all of this? The hazing from Dalglish, the clash with Wright, the musical attacking Fowler and Carragher. It's all the same thread, a deep-seated desire for respect and an acute sensitivity to perceived slights. Rush's career has been defined by a fierce competitiveness, and a refusal to be disrespected. The initial hatred for Dalglish came from a young player struggling to earn his place. The outburst at right was a visceral demand for respect on his emotionally fraught return, and the musical's lament over the lack of a mate-to-mate hello is a modern expression of the same wound. The AI musical isn't an aberration, it's the logical, if surreal, endpoint for a personality forged in the intense insular world of 1980s football, now struggling to navigate the complexities of 21st century media. The ghost in the machine isn't just the synthetic voice, it's the ghost of Rush's own relentless competitive past, still fighting old battles with new and bewildering weapons. Rush is a product of the pre-internet era, where a player's story was told through newspaper columns and television highlights. He's now resorted to a poorly executed digital tool to air his grievances in an era where such creations are destined for ridicule. But here's the final truth. While these feuds reveal a complex, sometimes difficult character, they were forged from the same relentless fire that made Ian Rush Liverpool's greatest ever goalscorer. Sensitivity, the fierce loyalty, the refusal to be disrespected. These weren't weaknesses, they were the fuel, the same personality traits that led him to almost hate Dalglish, to clash with Wright, and to release that bizarre musical are the traits that drove him to score 346 goals for Liverpool, and they secured his place in football history. Legendary? Yes. Complicated? Absolutely. But ultimately, unforgettable.